Okay, welcome to the next video in the Repertoire series, which will be about the main suggestion against the King's Indian, which is the move, oops, not d5, it's the move 5 f3, which is the Sämisch variation, named after a German grandmaster. Castles. And now is the first interesting parting of the ways, because white has to choose move 6. And on move 6 there are three main options. There's the old line, so to say, the classical move, which is bishop e6. This move is also still very much playable, of course. It has fallen a bit into disuse because of the pawn sacrifice c5, which is I think a bit surprising if you see it at the first time. Black sacrifices this pawn. This is the starting point, and now white has a couple of moves available. At move 10, bishop a3, e3, knight e2, and so on. He's tried a lot of moves. Interestingly, even with modern day computer assistant, it seems that black has enough compensation based on his slight development advantage and also his ideas of playing on the dark squares. One constant issue of this kind of pawn setup with pawns on c4 and e4 and the d pawn gone is the weakness on d4. So this pawn grab line has fallen a bit into disuse, and white doesn't have so many alternatives here. So white began looking at other options, and one move which is also my recommended line is knight g to e2. This is a flexible move, because you don't yet commit the bishop to e3 or g5, and you can choose one of the two squares depending on what black is playing next. One important point here is that actually the usual move for the King's Indian e5 is not so good here. Bishop g5 is a good answer. And one possible line there is c6, queen e2, knight bd7, and then d5. c takes d5, c takes d5, then maybe a6, g4, b5, knight g3. This is a pretty typical position if black plays e5, and it's a position that simply is better for white, no question, because of a nice space advantage. The setup with g4 and knight g3 really takes out f5 of the position. Black will never be able to play this. And with the king side safely blocked, white can easily concentrate on playing on the queen side. White's idea is not to castle long and then launch an attack, but rather play quietly, like bishop e2 and then maybe even short castle, or king f2 to g2, and then play on the queen side. It's a very nice position. e5 is really a bit of a dubious move. So what does black play if e5 is not the greatest here? Yeah, there are actually two moves that are played most often here. First one is knight to c6, and in this position white has a choice of bishop g5 and e3. I actually would recommend bishop e3 here, and then a6, queen d2, and rook b8, which is a pretty modern looking way of playing against the Sämisch variation. And here white has again a huge choice. He can play in a very positional fashion with rook c1. It's a good choice if you want rather a slow game, so to say, with maneuvering The point is that simply b5 is answered by this, and you win a pawn. So black needs to prepare this somewhere. Bishop d7 to cover c6, and then knight d1, with the idea of answering b5 with the c5. And this is an interesting maneuvering line. White often continues with knight to f2, and even g3, bishop g2, and castles. It's nice if you want to have a slow positional battle. The other completely different approach that is worth looking into is the old move h4, which is, I think, well forgotten. I think a lot of players might go for this line and simply have forgotten how the theory is really going here. Black's best is to stop it. It's pretty similar to the dragon, actually, to go h5 after h4 and not allow white to sacrifice a pawn with h5. And then play might continue knight c1 to get the bishop developed on f1, e5, d5, knight d4, knight b3. And now black really needs to sharpen up the play. If he just takes on b3, this is just nice for white. The setup on the king side really makes it difficult to go for f5. White has got the half-open a file and ideas of b4 and c5. White is just somewhat better here. This has been confirmed in a lot of games, I think in the 80s. So c5 is the main move here. Also a move which only will be played by people really knowing the line. dc, bc, actually. Knight d4, e d4, bishop d4. And now you've won a pawn. But black has got some counter ideas with d5. Of course, this is also a line you should study a bit before. cd, cd5, knight d7, and f4. Yeah, this has been played recently by, I think, strong Chinese players. I actually forgot the name, but white has, I think, a nice position. But it requires a little bit of studying at home, those h4 lines. But it's interesting because I think a lot of players don't know the specific stuff here, and then white will get a very nice position. Another main move, and I think it's played the most, is c5. Then white goes d5, e6, knight g3. You need to develop the bishop somehow on f1. E takes d5 and c takes d5. So you get this really nice highlighted here pawn chain from g2 to d5, which is very stable and makes it difficult for black to get some direct play against the e4 pawn, which is the typical point of counterplay in the Benoni, especially where white has just played knight f3. This pawn is just protected by the knight, and here you always have the safe protection by the f3 pawn. Play might continue a6, a4, knight bd7, bishop e2, and then very often black goes for h5 to push the knight back from g3. Then go, let's have a look, bishop g5, queen c7, queen e2, rook e8, castles, knight h7, bishop h6 as a sample line. If you want to play the Sämisch variation in general, there's one player you need to study the games of, which is a Russian grandmaster, Alexei Dreev. He's I think again rated over 2,700, and he's I'm pretty sure the world's biggest expert on this opening. I think he's played dozens of games in the Sämisch, and he's gotten all kinds of responses on move 6. There are also some rare ones, and he's gotten this kind of Benoni, I think, I don't know, 20-30 games or so, with great results. He beat some very strong players with it. For instance, I think Topalov and other strong grandmasters. So it's worth studying Dreyev's games. If you do that, you'll have a nice repertoire in the Sämisch. This is a very good starting point to learn the middle games, because he really knows what he's doing and has researched everything. So it's a good model player to look at, to study this opening. Just quickly back to move 6. Black has some offbeat tries as well, but usually those are not so active in regards to the center, so they are not especially dangerous, but still maybe an idea to look at. One tricky little move is a6. This is actually a line that I played myself sometimes as black. The idea is, if white goes for bishop g5, to play something like this, c5, d5, b5, to get some sort of Benko-like compensation, which is very much playable for black. White can, of course, with proper research, try to play for an edge, but black has got some counterplay. And it's in comparison to other lines relatively easy to play. So I would like to suggest, if someone really goes a6, to play bishop e3. This also fits in nicely with the suggestion of playing also to e3 after knight c6, because black can actually transpose back to this idea here. But mostly he will go for knight bd7 here, queen d2, c5, and now the point of keeping the bishop on e3 instead of g5 is that white is not really forced to play d5 here. He can just play rook d1, queen a5, and now knight to c1. This wouldn't be possible with the bishop on g5, because then cd4 would be nice for black. Here white, I think, just has a somewhat better position. It's not the end of the world for black, but white is slightly better. Black doesn't have much choice than taking here, and then you can just recapture with the bishop and continue knight to b3, bishop e2, castles, and you've got the standard Marozzi bind, which is always, I think, a little bit better for white. And it's not the typical King's Indian type of position where black gets active play. So a6 is not a huge problem, but it's good to know how to answer this. As a wrap-up of all the King's Indian lines that I presented, which has been h3 and bishop g5, f4 as the sharpest option, and f3 as the main option. One important point is, if you choose one of these 3 lines, you'll also have an automatic response to black playing the Benoni. d5, e6, and at this point, just according to the variation you play against the King's Indian, you either go h3, bishop g5, you go f4, or you go f3, and it's just a transposition. Black doesn't have anything better than bishop g7, knight ge2, castles, knight g3 for instance, and it's just another way of reaching the same position. So it's a bit like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So your King's Indian variation also provides you with a nice weapon against the Benoni. You don't need to learn 2 separate lines. Okay, thanks for watching. Comments or questions are welcome, of course, on YouTube. And if you like the channel, it's a good idea to subscribe to it in order to get notifications when new videos are uploaded. Thanks, and I'll continue soon with new videos in the series.